Found in the South American country's London embassy. Well, there have been big celebrations across Egypt after the ousting of President Morsi, forced out by his own army a year or so after coming to power. Now a new man in charge, as of this morning, Adli Mansour, making his speech during an official ceremony swearing him in as the interim president. He praised the Egyptian people, the country's army, police and media, and spoke about his vision for a better tomorrow.
We look forward to having early parliamentary and presidential elections according to the will of the people. This is the only safe entry to a better tomorrow, and more freedom, and more democracy, and more just, and more conscientious, and better behavior, in which lifting of the nation is achieved.
Well, I'm joined now from our central London studio by Adel Darwish, who's Egyptian and the political editor of Middle East magazine, and also Nabila Ramdani, a journalist specialising in the Middle East. Good afternoon to both of you. Can I just establish a frame of reference right at the start here? Let's get both of you, very briefly if we can, just to tell me whether, and our viewers, whether you feel this was a military coup. Nabila, are we right to use that phrase?
Yes, absolutely, and there's no doubt about that.
Great.
And
well,
there's a certain...
There is some doubt because some nations aren't using the phrase. Adele, is it a military coup?
No, because we have tools that are inadequate to measure something new. We must not twist that something new, but we have to find the new tools of measuring it.
Okay, so that's a yes and a no. Nabila, let's come back to you. Some people have characterised what's happened these past 24 hours as an urban uprising. It's the intelligentsia, it's the articulate middle classes in the big cities. And actually, when you get to the rural hinterland, where a lot of support for the Muslim Brotherhood is, you may find that a majority of people don't like what's happened over the past day.
I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of people who took to the streets are essentially urban dwellers, and it's no coincidence that the vast majority of the demonstrations took place in major cities, including Cairo and indeed Alexandria. But it has also to be said that the President Morsi, or former President Morsi, and his government were getting increasingly distrusted by the people and indeed becoming aloof, and there was an awful lot of dissatisfaction from the vast majority of Egyptians, including in the rural provinces, precisely because he failed to fix the economy and a number of crucial issues like unemployment, the rising price of fuel and indeed bread, for example. And he failed to deliver on his promises. But it has also to be highlighted that he had a huge challenge ahead. Egypt is a country of 80 million people, and it had deep structural and economic problems, which, to be fair on former President Morsi, would be hard to fix in just 1 year.
Nabila, they're talking about former President Mohammed Morsi. Should he be allowed to stand come the next election, whenever that happens? The military don't know yet when that will be. But William Hague, Britain's Foreign Secretary today, saying that there should be no political prisoners. And that would mean, presumably, that Mohammed Morsi, having been ousted by the military, should be allowed to stand again.
Well, at the moment, we have hundreds of members of the Muslim Brotherhood, and especially the leadership, who have been arrested by the military. Egypt has already sealed its borders because it fears that sympathizers for the Muslim Brotherhood, including more radical elements supportive of the Muslim Brotherhood, would come in the country and indeed try to win back the Muslim Brotherhood's mandate. So it is unlikely to see some sort of return, if any, of Morsi into political life. And let me reinforce the fact that it was indeed a military coup, and we saw all the clumsy cliche, post-colonial cliches of a coup, with the army storming the state newsroom and preventing, Morsi from making despairing speeches, and instead playing patriotic music and indeed calling for calm and appeasement. So there was some sense of unease about an elected state head of state being deposed effectively.
Adel Darwish, if you were, say, for instance, a jihadist currently, an Egyptian fighting in Syria and you hear about this news, the temptation, as Nabila was indicating, would be to hot-foot it back to join the jihad against this new, as you would see it, illegitimate government. What about those Salafists who, did register some pretty big support in the general election, not enough to win any kind of meaningful power, but they're there?
Well, first of all, the Salafists actually were into the coalition that included the heads of the two churches, the Muslim church and the Christian church, as well as all political parties. That's the invitation from the army in the Tuesday and Wednesday, in which the Muslim Brotherhood refused to participate. Secondly, it's inaccurate to say that Upper Egypt, the Said, the peasant, did not participate in the revolution. Total nonsense. They were the first time the actual farmers and peasants of Upper Egypt since 1919 revolution to participate were in the last 4 or 5 days, the 30th of June.
But they did vote, didn't they,
I'm talking about,
they did vote and they voted for Morsi.
Facts on the ground. It was not. They did not participate on 2011. They participated on Sunday and Monday. So let's just enact that correctly. And on the sort of return of jihadists, obviously there was a debate going on within the Muslim Brotherhood. You have the international organization trying to advise Morsi to accept dialogue with the opposition, inclusive government, even if he has to relinquish power, because they made regional gains. They control Tunisia, they control Gaza through Hamas, they are on their way to control Syria because America is going to supply arms, and they control good parts of Libya. But the hardliners supported by Hamas, which is branch of the Muslim Brothers, were pressurizing Morsi to actually have how to stand. So that debate is still going on inside the Muslim Brotherhood.
Nabila Ramdani, in terms of the way things develop, not just in coming days, but in coming years, some people have presented a pretty bleak picture, bleak scenario. On the one hand, something like Algeria, a civil war, 200,000 dead, we all know about that. Or something more like Pakistan, where a country has a military coup and kind of muddles through without a lot of democracy, but kind of just stumbles from one crisis to another without a mass amount of bloodshed.
Well, I think we shouldn't underestimate the potential results that such events could trigger in the area, and especially given the history of the issue of the army in Egyptian politics. It has effectively been ruling the country since 1952 after a coup by free officers, and has been dominating not only the political life in Egypt, but also has a massive stake in the economy. And what effectively Mubarak did over 30 years was to reinforce their position, and he maintained a highly professional and indeed well-equipped army, which is unlikely to disappear overnight. And what Morsi was attempting to do was to neutralize it, and he obviously failed to do so. So who will guard the guards will be a particularly relevant question in the democratic future of Egypt.
Adel Darwish, you were shaking your head vigorously. Tell us why.
Well, I was just amused by this comparison with Algeria. I'm sure Ms. Ramdani, I don't know if you agree with me or not, being Algerian herself. I covered the 1991 events there. The French have made it adamantly sort of clear that they were going to push the Algerian army for a coup if the election result was brought what they disliked. Totally different scenario in Egypt. Look, the army, the generals in Egypt or anywhere else, by default, are not Democrats. They are not liberals. But they flew in their helicopters and seen 18 million people out on the streets, the majority of which, about 16 million, are anti-Morsi, wanting him to go. Of course, they know that the Muslim Brotherhood secret organization have some kind of weapons. So what they wanted to do, they just tried to get out of the situation and avoid bloodshed on the streets. On the Pakistan scenario, I probably agree with you. You know why? Because America final aim with eye on the Gulf oil do not want to see a secular democracy developing in Egypt and then influencing as the Gulf states for a copycat models and becoming also Democrats. They wanted a Pakistan-like scenario, some kind of an Islamist sort of rules, then people get fed up, call the army to come and have a coup, then the people get fed up and elect the Islamist again. But I think the awakening now among Egyptian people might put an end to that, because the rule of law, now getting the Constitutional Court is rule of law. Ataturk was not Democrat, but he imposed the rule of law, and then democracy took over by itself.
Nabila Ramdani, final thought from you, really. Bashar al-Assad this morning has said that what we've witnessed in Egypt is, quote, the end of political Islam. That will be a statement that many people disagree with, but he's trying to put a sort of grand historical narrative sweep on things. So tell me what you think about that. And also, and finally and briefly, as a woman, we have you as a woman, what do you make of these reports from Tahrir Square of so many women being abused there? I mean, you know, it's clearly a very difficult environment for female protesters and activists to operate in.
Well, that's that's a disaster to see, you know, the level of harassment and indeed sexual assault being perpetrated on women who are, you know, taking to the streets to make a very clear political point, and a point that they are entitled to make. And it has to be said that under the presidency of Morsi, we've seen an erosion of the rights of women, and that's one of the things that you know, the Egyptians were particularly angry about. Sorry, what was the second aspect of your question?
Yeah, Bashar al-Assad only this morning, said that what we've witnessed in Egypt, and there'll be those people who think this is a fairly grandiloquent way of putting it, but he said what's happened is the end of political Islam.
I don't think that this is particularly true. You know, historically, the Muslim Brotherhood has always been persecuted, its members arrested, tortured, and indeed jailed for a long period of time, including Morsi, who spent some time in prison himself. And what it effectively led to a more organized body of brothers who organized themselves politically in the villages, especially, essentially taking over the role of the state by providing essential services that the state was failing to deliver under dictatorship. And what we are likely to see is, you know, perhaps a resurgence, a more forceful resurgence of an even more organized political body, and hopefully a movement that will not resort to violence, as it hasn't done, you know, for a long while now.
Nabila Ramdani and Adel Darwish, thanks both very much indeed. Nelson Mandela's eldest grandson, Mandla, says he feels his family have turned against him.